Hey guys, we are Sean and Christy of Long Long Honeymoon, and today we have a fantastic topic for you, Yellowstone National Park. The truth about RV camping in Yellowstone. In this video, we're going to give you at least 20 tips. That's ambitious, but actually we've got a lot to say about Yellowstone, so let's jump right into it. Tip number one, expect primitive camping. Yellowstone is the oldest and arguably the best national park in the national park system. That doesn't mean that the RV campgrounds are the most advanced or developed. In fact, it's the opposite, because a lot of the campgrounds were laid out many decades ago. So the sites are smaller.
In fact, our Airstream is 25 feet long, and sometimes we've had trouble getting into campgrounds just because they don't have a lot of sites that accommodate rigs that are over like 24 feet. You know, if you've got a 40-foot motorhome or you've got a huge fifth wheel, go online and do some research and find out which campgrounds are best for you, because there are definitely campgrounds that we can't fit in and we're only 25 feet long. So
as of the making of this video, the only place you're going to get full hookups is Fishing Bridge. And frankly, Fishing Bridge is the least aesthetically pleasing campground of the bunch. It's basically a parking lot with some trees. You know, if you want full hookup, that's the sacrifice you're going to make. Something else to be aware of is a lot of these campsites are not only dry camping, they can be kind of small and difficult to maneuver.
Even pull-through sites. And we actually had an incident last year where we were in a pull-through site. We went ahead and unhooked. And a few days later when we were leaving, we went to hook up and we realized if we tried to pull forward out of this campsite, we were going to hit a tree. There was no other way around it. It was just the trees were so tight into the site, we couldn't make the curve and not hit a tree. So we ended up having to back out of this pull-through site. It wasn't comical at the time because it was stressful, but we maneuvered our Airstream. I mean, like,
it was an ordeal.
Ridiculous.
It was probably a 10 to 15 minute process at least, just extricating ourselves and our rig.
And we had people come over and say, hey, do you need help? And we were like, no, let us just do it, just the two of us. And we ended up blocking our loop for about 5 minutes there.
Yeah, but it was definitely kind of an elephant in a phone booth situation. And that happened to us at the Madison campground. And if you go around the Madison campground and look at the trees next to the campsites, you're going to see places where people have scrubbed those trees with
big
their
scrape
RVs.
marks. So just know, you might exaggerate a little bit on the size of your RV when you're camping in Madison for that reason, because if we had it to do over, I think we probably would have not done a pull-through. We would have backed into that pull-through site. I think that would have been easier and better.
And once again, when you look at those trees and the damage that was done to those trees, you know damage was done to RVs.
Oh, for sure.
So my message to you is, if you find yourself in that situation, take your time. Don't get too frustrated. People around you are going to understand. They're going to have to understand, because you don't want to damage your rig getting out of a campsite at Yellowstone. Yellowstone does allow generators, and the typical hours, I believe, are 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. But they have instituted a noise policy, and you'll have to double check on the noise policy. So if you have an open frame construction site type of generator, you could have issues running it at Yellowstone. If you have a quiet inverter generator, then you should have no problems at all.
Which is what you should be using if you're going camping.
Yeah, you really should. More on that subject at a future time.
Yellowstone is huge. It is, larger than the state of Rhode Island? Basically the entire, northwest corner of Wyoming. The roads are 2 lanes. The speed limits are low, depending on the part of the park that you're in. And it takes a long time to get from one point to the other. So if you look at Yellowstone on a map, it basically forms like a figure 8. With like a road through the middle of it. And to get from the very bottom, like Grant Village, which is the southernmost campground, to Mammoth, which is the northernmost campground, will take you probably about 4 hours.
Yeah, it'll take several hours for
Yeah,
sure.
so you might want to make sure that when you visit Yellowstone, you stay at more than one campground so that you have easy access to different areas of the park. So you might want to stay in Grant Village or Madison for part of your stay and then move up to, Canyon or Tower or Mammoth, depending on the size of your rig.
You look at it on a map, and sometimes you might think these distances aren't that overwhelming, but you just can't go quickly in Yellowstone. I mean, your actual travel speed ends up being like 25 or 30 miles an hour to a lot of places. If you're going there in the summer, there's going to be a lot of other traffic on the road. There are going to be animals on the road. I mean, bison jams are a real issue. All right, so we're in Yellowstone National Park, somewhere between Mammoth and Tower. And this is the kind of thing you run into in Yellowstone. Bison will use the road, and they will use the road in the day, and they will use it at night. So you need to be very careful if you're driving around Yellowstone at night. We've had a couple of really kind of scary situations in which you're doing, 45 miles per hour. You come around a bend, and there is a massive bison standing in the middle of the road. Food service in Yellowstone ain't the greatest, okay? And this is coming from a guy who used to chop vegetables in the kitchen at Canyon, right? So I've worked there. I've sort of seen behind the scenes. Most of those kitchens at the restaurants in Yellowstone are only open for a few months out of the year. They're closed most of the year. They don't have any consistency in terms of like a chef or staff, and a lot of the things are frozen or come out of a can. That's just the truth, okay? When you go and you dine out at Yellowstone, it's probably going to be kind of a pricey meal, and just a lot of times the food can be kind of mediocre.
The one sort of fine dining place that I can think of that I would say you should eat there just for the experience, not because the food is so great, and that's the Old Faithful Inn.
I'm just warning you up front that you may want to arrive with some supplies, maybe some nice juicy steaks or nice juicy tofu, whatever you're into, so that you can enjoy nice meals at your campsite.
They do have some good ice cream counters.
They
do. If you want a sweet treat, they do have some good scoop ice cream counters, but that's about all I would recommend.
And that's another job I held at Yellowstone. I really did scoop ice cream over at Fishing Bridge one summer. Now, within Yellowstone, they have some fairly simple, bare bones, basic grocery stores and supply stores. But if you need more, you can go to West Yellowstone, Montana. It's a small town outside the west entrance of Yellowstone. And West Yellowstone has a couple of grocery stores. Or you can go to Gardner, Montana. Gardner, Montana is outside the north entrance of Yellowstone, north of Mammoth Hot Springs. Both of those small towns have some decent little pub-style restaurants that are usually pretty fun and pretty good food. Like if you want some good pizza, you can go to K-Bar in Gardner, Montana. We always enjoy that.
Yeah, their pizza's really good.
And you can also find more in terms of groceries there.
The grocery stores in both of those towns have a good selection. They have, meat, that sort of thing. So if you want something to grill. And really, considering how remote they are, their prices are not bad at all. Feel that nice warm steam. Respect the geothermal activity. You're basically standing in the middle of a supervolcano. That's all Yellowstone is. It's just the middle of a big volcano that's closed up that could re-erupt at any minute. Pay attention to the signs. When it says don't leave the boardwalk, don't leave the boardwalk. There's a reason for it. It's because the ground is thin in a lot of areas there. And you could step off that boardwalk and take 5 steps and end up in boiling water up to your knees.
Yes.
Pay attention to where you're walking. Don't fall into people. Don't knock into people. Pay attention to your surroundings.
Yeah, there have been at least 20 deaths at Yellowstone from people jumping into the wrong hot pool. So, you will see steam coming out of the ground really throughout the park, especially obviously in the geyser basins like Norris Geyser Basin, Old Faithful, Mammoth Hot Springs. But I've seen steam coming out of the ground around Lake Yellowstone and also at Canyon. It could be anywhere. But the bottom line point is, one of the reasons you go to Yellowstone is for the geothermal activity. That's what makes Yellowstone so unique. There's no other park like it, at least in the lower 48. And I believe over half of the world's geysers are located in Yellowstone. So it's the geothermal activity that's really a reason you go. It's what makes Yellowstone so special. Don't only see Old Faithful. Go back behind Old Faithful and be sure that you tour all those geysers and hot pots and all that geothermal activity out there.
Yeah, really behind Old Faithful are some even more interesting geysers, in my opinion, just because some of them will erupt for like 20 or 30 minutes at a time. So they may not be as high as Old Faithful, but they last longer, and to me they're just more interesting.
Yeah. If you have young kids, keep them on a tight leash.
Yes.
If you have pets, keep them away from that area.
Yeah.
Because if you have the type of dog that might want to take off and run away from you to chase after a squirrel or whatever, don't take them to Old Faithful or to Norris Geyser Basin or any of these places. And yes, people have done that, and you can guess some really terrible things have happened to those pets and also to people who may try and save their pets.
So just double check the national park websites because, like I said, most of them don't allow pets on hiking trails.
Yeah. Every year someone is burned badly. Periodically someone dies.
Last year a guy died.
I mean, it wasn't too long ago. A guy went off the boardwalk and went strolling across a geyser basin, and guess what? He fell into a pit and his body was dissolved in sulfuric acid. And so, I mean, they had nothing left of that guy.
There was nothing to give his family to bury. There's nothing left. It just disintegrates to nothing.
It's just not a great way to go.
No.
Don't miss Old Faithful Inn. It's so special. They literally don't make them like they used to. Once you step inside, you'll realize this is what Disney World is basing their hotels on. Like, this is the real deal. It's a work of art.
Go in and explore it. Go have a seat in front of the fireplace in one of the rocking chairs. Go upstairs. There's a bar on the second level that you can get a drink at, and you can take it out onto there's like a covered patio on the front. And you can actually sit out there, and they have benches that face Old Faithful. So you can actually sit right there and watch Old Faithful erupt if you don't want to go out and wait with the masses. So you can sit on the front porch with your beer or wine or soda or whatever and watch Old Faithful.
Yeah, really, of all the architecture in Yellowstone, and probably all the architecture in the national park system, Old Faithful Inn is the one place to see. You got to just step in and experience it. You got snow on your hat.
Well, it's snowing here. That's why.
So the next place we highly recommend you do not miss is the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone. So Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone is basically where there are some really amazing waterfalls and lookout points where you can stand back from far away and watch the overflow of the falls, or you can hike down to the brink of the falls and stand like, what, 20 feet from where the water flows over the edge. I highly recommend both. The view from across the falls is easy to get to. It's a pretty simple walk. I believe it's wheelchair accessible.
Yeah, I think it's called Artist Point.
Yeah, so if you're going there, it's not a hike. It's paved the whole way. There are some steps, but I believe there's a way that you can get around the steps if you're in a wheelchair. So that is one to not miss. But if you are able to hike, and you can hike an elevation change, I highly suggest doing the hike to the brink of the falls, because that look over is just so powerful. Yeah. I mean, you can just hear the water. It's so loud, and you just really see the power of nature.
Yeah, I think all of those hikes are fantastic. Like, there are several sort of around the canyon. You can go to the brink of the upper falls, the brink of the lower falls. Go down and view the lower falls kind of up close.
Yeah.
The brink is actually where the water is passing over into the river.
And that hike to get there is a challenging hike. It's not long, but it's basically switchbacks straight down the side of that mountain. It's a strenuous hike for me coming back up. So just know that when you sign up for it.
And that makes a point about elevation change in Yellowstone. When you enter Yellowstone from the south, you know, even though Grand Teton National Park obviously is at a pretty high elevation, you're going up a supervolcano when you're going up into Yellowstone, so your elevation gets even higher. And we've seen, for example, just in the past 10 miles or so, the temperature's dropped almost 10 degrees. It's gone from 42 degrees to 34, and it keeps getting colder, and that's why we're seeing so much more snow. You're going up, kind of climbing up the side of that supervolcano. And Canyon is probably one of the highest, maybe the highest elevation campground in all of Yellowstone. We've been in Yellowstone before when it's been snowing at Canyon, but not snowing in other parts of the park. Some of those hikes down into the canyon, you're walking back up these switchbacks, you know, they're very steep and very thin oxygen air.
Yeah. So it will get your blood pumping. You'll be breathing hard, especially if you're from somewhere like Alabama, like us, where the elevation is relatively low. You do have to acclimate to it.
The Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone is very special to me. I mean, first of all, I worked there for a summer back in the 90s and kind of fell in love with it. But even after seeing the Grand Canyon and seeing Canyonlands National Park in Utah, I still feel that the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone is one of the most beautiful canyons you're ever going to see anywhere. You're in this thickly wooded area. Like, everything around there is like sort of thick trees and woods. You know, you're not that far from Hayden Valley and wide open plains. And you turn a corner and suddenly there's this gorge, this, you know, fantastic canyon in front of you. And there are all sorts of interesting colors.
Yeah, the rock colors are beautiful.
Because of the sandstone there, so there's like pink and orange and pale yellows. And then the waterfalls. It's just a really magical place.
Well, we just saw a black bear. He started out on this hillside over here on the other side of the street. And he kind of walked across and up, and then he came all the way over and down. And he actually crossed the street between a bunch of cars. And he's kind of down in this valley now. You'll kind of see people down there chasing the bear, which is really stupid in my opinion.
Respect the wildlife. Every year we see these videos coming out of Yellowstone of people acting like complete fools around bears, around bison. We heard a story of one lady walked up to an adult male bison, grabbed it by the horns to turn its head
so she could take a better picture.
And guess what happened to that lady? She got gored. The EMT who was telling us about the incident said it was one of the worst bison gorings he had ever seen.
They're like bulls. So if you wouldn't walk up to a bull and do that, don't do it to a bison.
In fact, everybody fears the bears, understandably so, but the bison are responsible for a number of injuries inflicted on tourists every year because people don't respect the bison.
So be very respectful of the bison. I know they look slow and cow-like, but they're not. They can change on a dime.
The summer that I was working in Yellowstone, there was a tourist who got gored by a bison, and I was told that she lost her left buttock. And so I always say, don't lose your left buttock. You don't want that.
Yeah.
And if you're curious about where to see some of these animals, you can always see bison, well, in a lot of different places in the park, but Hayden Valley is a great place to see them, and that's between lake and canyon. It's just beautiful, wide open plains. The Yellowstone River is coming through there, and there are large herds of wild bison. And I know you might think, well, I've seen bison before, what's the big deal? When you see these massive herds of free-roaming wild bison, it's an awesome sight. And you never know what you might see. I mean, for example, we've been in that area and we've seen an entire herd suddenly decide to cross the river. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, we better take our pictures fast. Yeah.
And that was spectacular. It was our first time in Yellowstone together. We were tent camping on that trip. And so we were driving around in this little rental Chrysler Pacifica. And suddenly this huge herd of bison crosses the river right in front of us.
Yeah.
And it was really just a magical experience.
Really cool.
So that's the kind of thing that can happen in Yellowstone. I think everybody who goes to Yellowstone, you want to see bears, you want to see wolves, you want to see all these different animals. And the thing about Yellowstone, it's not a zoo. There are no guarantees.
Yeah.
Every day is going to be different. Mm-hmm. You could drive around all day long for 10 hours and see, nothing or very little.
Yeah.
And then other days you're going to drive around and you're going to see wolves and bear and gray owls. We've seen the gamut.
If you see something that isn't a herd of bison, then I recommend you stop, because there's a chance you may not see it again, especially if it's a bear or if it's a wolf or, something like that that's sort of more unusual. Last year we saw a gray owl for the first time in all of our travels to Yellowstone, and we stopped. We saw it for probably 30 minutes or so, and we tried to come back and see it again later, and it just wasn't there. So I'm glad we stopped when we did.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it was our one chance to see a gray owl.
And it was near Canyon,
Yeah.
by the way. Bears. Everybody wants to see bears.
Mm-hmm.
We've gone to Yellowstone at times and seen lots of bears. At other times, we've gone
Not
and
a
we haven't
single
seen a
bear.
single bear. Now, we've usually had the best luck seeing bears in the northern part of the park. I would say between Mammoth and Tower Falls.
Yeah.
There seems to be a lot of bear activity.
And the other thing to do is ask rangers. Ask them where can I see bear? Where is there bear activity right now? And they'll tell you. In fact, the last time when we were in Yellowstone and we saw a bear was near Tower, and they actually had some trails closed because of bear activity. There was a bison carcass that the bear was going back to, and so there were a couple of trails that were close to that carcass, so they had signs on them, this trail closed due to bear activity. So, if you ask a ranger what you're looking for specifically, they'll usually tell you, and they usually have a pretty good idea, because people check in with them and say, hey, we saw this here today, or, other rangers will kind of spread the word amongst them.
Yeah, there's usually some grizzly activity around the lake and also Fishing Bridge. In fact, that's one reason you have to have a hard-sided camper at Fishing Bridge,
Right.
is because of the bear activity. And I've seen a couple grizzlies in that area.
The last bear death in Yellowstone was near Lake, and a gentleman was killed on a hike.
That story's not going to help my pitch to you later about taking a hike in Yellowstone, but we'll talk about that in a minute.
You got to be prepared.
Bear spray is not a bad investment.
If you are hiking in the backcountry especially, do not go without bear spray. And now they do offer bear spray rental in some areas.
Yeah, something I've realized about bear spray, you get value from it even if you don't use it, because it's kind of like insurance. You hope you never have to use it. You're gonna enjoy your hike so much more if you're hiking with bear spray, because you're not worried and feeling defenseless. So no guarantees on seeing a bear, but you might get lucky. You might see a bunch. As far as moose go, we enjoy seeing moose. It's very rare to see moose in Yellowstone in our experience. We've seen a couple. I mean, we saw one that was technically in Yellowstone in the Montana portion of the park, kind of north of West Yellowstone. We have much better luck seeing moose just south of Yellowstone down in Grand Teton National Park, which is Moose Central.
Yeah, that's where the moose go to party.
Yeah, a lot of moose down there.
Mammoth there are a lot of elk there. So you actually have to be careful when you park at Mammoth to go into any of the stores or the restaurants or what have you, because they will be out in the parking lot and they'll get between you and your car. So you have to be careful when you're walking around at Mammoth.
Yeah, there's so many elk in Mammoth. They're
And
almost
they
like
will
a
charge.
hazard. And as far as seeing wolves, you can ask around. Wolves, I think, are a little bit easier to see because the packs have their kind of turf usually, and they will set up a den, and the rangers and so forth can kind of tell you where that den might be. So wolves are easier to see, but I would say they're more difficult to see up close,
Right.
because wolves usually keep pretty far away from humans. And like the last time we were in Yellowstone and saw wolves, they looked kind of like large ants because they were so far away. You need a telescope to see them.
That's another tip. If you're going to Yellowstone, I highly recommend bringing some binoculars with you.
Take a hike. I think it is wise to step away from the main road and step away from the crowds, get on a hiking trail, and get, a mile or so away from your vehicle. I'm not saying that you have to do some 10-day excursion to the backcountry. I'm saying pick a hiking trail, and in the YouTube description of this video, there will be a link to some different hiking trail books that you can buy before you go to Yellowstone. You can browse through those books, pick out a trail or two that sounds manageable to you in terms of its difficulty and the time invested in it. And you don't really need special gear or equipment. I mean, hiking boots are a nice thing to have, but a lot of those trails are manageable for the average person. But when you get out into Yellowstone and you get away from the crowds and away from the main road, you begin to really experience some of the magic of the park.
Yeah, they're pretty honest in those books about how strenuous or easy the hike is. So just be honest with yourself, know what you can do and what you can't. And if you ever feel like it's too much, just turn around and come back.
So take a hike, but be sure you bring your bear spray, because I don't want any of our viewers being eaten alive by bears. Okay? If you're the adventurous sort, consider swimming in Yellowstone. There's a place north of Mammoth Hot Springs called the Boiling River. It's just outside of Mammoth by about 5 miles, just before you get to Gardner, Montana. And in the Boiling River, they actually have hot pots, which is, basically natural hot spring.
So it's not the boiling hot pots. We're not telling you to get into that.
No.
It's basically a spot where a boiling geothermal activity area flows into the cold river. So it's sort of where that cold and hot mixes.
We have an entire video on YouTube dedicated to it. So if you're interested in doing this activity, go watch that video after you finish this one, okay? And if you're in that area of Yellowstone, be sure and go see the old entrance to the park. There is a stone, arch, and it's just kind of the classic entrance to Yellowstone. It's not really used today as an official entrance, but it's a great place to stop and take some pictures. So that's it, guys. At least 20 tips for RV camping in Yellowstone National Park. We hope that this video has been helpful to you and helps you get the most out of your trip to Yellowstone. We love Yellowstone. I mean, we call this video The Truth About Yellowstone Park because I think you will have a better experience if you know a little bit what to expect when you go there. We have a video here on YouTube called Why Not to Visit Yellowstone National Park, and that video is very tongue-in-cheek to try and keep the crowds down. But in reality, Yellowstone is a national treasure, and every American should go and visit it because it is spectacular.
If you ever get the chance to go, definitely do it and give it the time that it deserves. Don't try to blow through it in a day or two, because there is so much to see there beyond just Old Faithful.
Yeah, Yellowstone is like an onion. You just peel away the layers because there's so much to it.
There's horseback riding, there's chuck wagon dinners, all sorts of things like that. Lots of activities. If you want it, it's there. Just check their website and they have all the details on those activities there.
Go in well prepared with reasonable expectations and you're going to have a blast. Okay? Thanks for tuning in. We are Sean and Christy. This is Long Long Honeymoon. If you are new here, please subscribe to our YouTube channel because we're cranking out videos like this all the time.
If you want to make sure you never miss a video, click the bell next to the subscribe button, and that way you will get an alert every time we upload a new video. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up. And until next time, lo.
If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you disliked it, give it a thumbs down. Feel free to leave a comment. And of course, don't forget to subscribe.